Find somewhere to die? No, honey. I found somewhere to live again. Welcome to Women's Stories. We are more than just a channel. We are a sacred space dedicated to giving a voice to the profound experiences of women. Here, we shed light on the silent battles, the heartbreaks, the triumphs, and the deep journeys of resilience that define a woman's life. Every single narrative you hear on Women's Stories originates from real letters, real emails sent directly by women like you. We take your heartfelt messages and meticulously develop them into compelling stories. Our promise to you is absolute. We guarantee complete anonymity and confidentiality. Your identity, your privacy, is paramount today. We invite you to step into another raw and powerful journey. If you're watching this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm Alara, and this is the story of how I, a homeless widow, became the woman holding all the cards. Because, my dears, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. 2 months ago, I was Alara Vance, a devoted wife of 43 years and the mother of one spectacularly ungrateful daughter. When Theron, my husband, died of a heart attack at 71, I thought my world had ended. In those days, I drifted through the large house we had built together. Every corner held a memory. Every window frame held a shadow of Theron. The smell of the coffee he brewed each morning lingered. I heard the sound of him reading the paper in his favorite armchair. Even the heavy creak of his footsteps on the stairs haunted me. It all became knives twisting in my grieving heart. The pain was immense and overwhelming. I had no energy to think or act. I just wanted to curl up and disappear, along with the part of my life that was gone forever. In the midst of that profound grief, my daughter Serena appeared. She swooped into my life like a vulture in designer clothes. "Mom, I know this must be the hardest time for you," she said. Her voice dripped with a fake concern that was terrifying in its sweetness. "You can't possibly manage this big house alone," she added. "The stairs, the maintenance, all those memories. It's just not healthy for you." At the time, I was too lost in my sorrow to see the cold calculation behind her feigned sympathy. I should have seen it, shouldn't I? Serena had always been Theron's favorite. She was his little princess who could do no wrong. When she married that investment banker, Julian, and started producing grandchildren, Theron doted on them endlessly. Meanwhile, I was just the woman who cooked, cleaned, and kept everything running smoothly. After the funeral, Serena became increasingly insistent about my situation. She and Julian would come over for family dinners and corner me in my own kitchen. They brought glossy real estate magazines and brochures for luxury retirement communities. "Mom, these places are wonderful," Serena would say. "You'd have people your own age, activities, no responsibilities." What they really meant was no inheritance to split and no inconvenient mother to manage. I understood that, but I chose to ignore it. I still believed that however selfish Serena seemed, she was still my daughter. I believed she would never truly hurt me. The final blow came last Tuesday. I had been living in what Serena now called our house for 6 weeks since Theron's death. I was still sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't bear to pack up our bedroom. That morning, Serena arrived unannounced with Julian and 2 large suitcases. "Mom, we've made a decision," she said, her voice firm. "Julian got the promotion and we need to move into town immediately. This house is perfect for us." I just stared at her, unable to comprehend. "Move in? But this is my home." Serena's mask slipped for just a moment. I saw the cold calculation underneath. "Actually, Mom, according to Dad's will, I inherited everything," she said. "The house, the investments, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find a place of your own." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my head spin. "Serena, there must be some mistake." "No mistake," she said. "Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife." Just the wife. 43 years of marriage were reduced to 3 words. My heart shattered. But the true killing blow was still coming. "Find somewhere else to die," she said. "You're useless now." I stood there, stunned, unable to believe what I had just heard. That sentence was so cold and cruel, it could have frozen the sun. It echoed in my mind like a death sentence. Alara Vance was dead, I thought. The devoted wife was gone. The loving mother was gone. The woman who had sacrificed her entire life for her family was gone. In that moment, it all vanished. I no longer recognized the daughter I had brought into this world. Serena, who once ran into my arms every time she fell, was now a stranger. The girl who held my hand on her first day of school was gone. The woman in front of me looked at me with eyes devoid of warmth. There was no love there, just hunger. I packed my things in a daze. 43 years of marriage fit into 2 suitcases and a small box of photos. Serena watched from the doorway. She checked her watch as if I were making her late for something important. "There's a nice senior complex on Maple Street," she offered. Her voice was as cheerful as someone recommending a decent restaurant. "Very affordable. I'm sure they have openings." "Affordable," she said again. My daughter was inheriting $33 million and suggested I check into a welfare facility for the elderly. Julian loaded my suitcases into their BMW with practiced efficiency. He handled my luggage like he was disposing of trash. "You'll love having your independence again, Alara," he said. He didn't quite meet my eyes. No more worrying about house maintenance or property taxes. What he really meant was, no more home. As the car pulled away, I watched my house disappear in the rearview mirror. My house, Theron's house, now Serena's house. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 4 decades making that house a home. I hosted Serena's birthday parties there. I nursed Theron through illnesses there. I maintained every detail he cared about. Now I was being driven to a budget motel like an unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome. The Sunset Inn was exactly what you'd expect from a place charging $49 a night. The walls were thin, the towels were thinner. The carpet had seen better decades. Serena handed me $200 in cash as if she were tipping a hotel maid. "This should cover you for a few days while you get settled," she said. "I'll have Julian transfer some money into your account once we sort through Dad's paperwork." She meant some money from my own inheritance. After they left, I sat on the sagging mattress and tried to process what had happened. In the span of 3 hours, I had gone from grieving widow to homeless senior citizen. The woman I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for had discarded me like an expired prescription. But as I sat there in that depressing motel room, something began nagging at me. Theron had always been meticulous about his affairs. He was obsessively organized about important documents. He had shown me the will years ago. He explained his wishes. He made sure I understood everything. I was absolutely certain that what Serena claimed was not what it said. Theron had been many things. He was traditional. He was sometimes stubborn. He could be patronizing about money matters. But he wasn't cruel. The man who held my hand through my mother's death would not leave me destitute. The man who surprised me with flowers every anniversary would not abandon me. It was impossible. A sense of unease crept over me. A small but stubborn seed of doubt took root. A chill ran down my spine. The next morning, I used the motel's Wi-Fi to search for Theron's attorney, Alaric Vance. Same last name, no relation. He was the lawyer who had handled our house purchase and various business matters over the years. His office was downtown. It was a 20-minute bus ride that cost me precious cash. It still felt necessary. Alaric Vance was a distinguished man in his 70s. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced that Mrs. Vance was here about her husband's estate, he looked genuinely surprised. "Alara, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come in," he said. "I tried calling your house several times, but Serena said you were traveling." "Traveling?" I repeated. That's what my daughter had told him. "Mr. Vance, I need to ask you about Theron's will." He looked puzzled. "Of course," he said. "Didn't Serena provide you with your copy?" I gave her the original and several copies after the reading. My stomach dropped. "There was a reading?" I asked. "Alara, you were supposed to be there," he said gently. "Serena said you were too distraught. She said she'd handle everything and make sure you received your inheritance." The blood drained from my face as the reality hit me. "Mr. Vance," I whispered, "I was never told about any reading. Serena told me she inherited everything." Alaric's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He reached for a thick file folder. His movements suddenly turned urgent. "Alara, that's impossible," he said. "Your husband's will is very specific about your inheritance." He pulled out a document. I recognized Theron's neat signature at the bottom. It was witnessed and notarized. As Alaric began reading, I realized Serena had lied about everything. "I, Theron James Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Ilara Ann Vance, the following," he read. "Our primary residence at 847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $23 million. My head started spinning. $23 million. The house? 70% of everything. Alaric continued reading, and his voice grew more serious. "To my daughter, Serena Vance Hayes, I leave $10 million to be held in trust. Distributions begin on her 45th birthday. They are contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death. Contingent upon her treatment of me, I repeated. Theron had known. Somehow he had known exactly what Serena would try to do. Mr. Vance, I whispered. Serena told me I inherited nothing. She moved into my house. She gave me $200 and suggested I find a senior facility. The elderly lawyer's face flushed with anger. Alara, what Serena has done is called elder abuse and fraud, he said. She has committed multiple felonies. But she had legal documents, I said. She showed me papers. Forged, most likely, he replied. Or documents from an earlier draft. Your husband updated his will 6 months before his death. He was concerned about Serena's attitude toward money and her sense of entitlement. The room was spinning. All those times Serena had dismissed my opinions replayed in my head. She talked over me during family dinners. She rolled her eyes when I tried to contribute. She bragged about their expensive vacations. She praised Julian's business deals. Theron had been watching. He had been evaluating. He had been making decisions. There's more, Alara, Alaric said. The trust provision for Serena specifically states that if she fails to treat you with respect and dignity following his death, the entire $10 million reverts to you. I stared at him in shock. Are you saying... I'm saying your daughter just cost herself $10 million, he said. Her inheritance is now yours as well. You're not inheriting $23 million, Alara. You're inheriting $33 million, plus the house and all personal property. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Serena had been so eager to claim her inheritance that she triggered the very clause designed to protect me from her greed. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely steady. Alaric smiled, and for the first time since Theron's death, I felt genuine warmth directed at me. Now, my dear, we call the police about the fraud, he said. And then we call Serena and inform her that she's about to receive the shock of her life. Can she fight this? I asked. With what money? He said. She's about to discover that every account she thought she controlled actually belongs to you. Every investment, every bank account, every asset, except your house, is frozen pending investigation of her fraudulent activities. I thought about Serena in my house, already planning renovations. I pictured her shopping for new furniture with money she thought was hers. Julian was probably calculating how the inheritance would affect his portfolio. They had no idea that in about 6 hours, their entire world was going to implode. I felt a cold, intense spark ignite through the fog in my heart. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't resignation. It was outrage. It was a fury that had been suppressed for decades. Now it flared into a brilliant, cleansing flame. I had lost everything. But now I had the chance to get it all back. Not just the money. Not just the house. My dignity. My justice. And Serena was going to face the consequences of her cruelty. Alaric Vance's office, with its dark oak-paneled walls and the scent of old paper mingling with leather, became the command central for what he cheerfully called Operation Justice. I sat in a plush leather armchair, a steaming cup of tea in my hands, still trying to process the full scope of Serena's deception. It felt like waking up from a long nightmare, only to realize the nightmare was real. But now I was no longer the one being hunted. I was the hunter. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief of losing Theron was still there, an ember glowing in my chest, but it was no longer a fog clouding my every thought. Instead, it became fuel. The outrage at Serena's betrayal wasn't a destructive emotion. It was a finely honed sword. For 43 years, I had lived for other people. I was Theron's wife, Serena's mother. My role was defined by their needs and desires. But sitting in that lawyer's office, I asked myself, who is Alara? What does Alara want? For the first time in my life, the answer was crystal clear. Alara wants justice. Alaric moved with a surprising energy for a man in his 70s. He was like an old general being called back to the battlefield for one last fight, a fight for honor. All right, Alara, he said, placing his hands on his desk. Step 1. We freeze all the assets. Serena cannot be allowed to move a single cent. He picked up the phone, his voice firm and authoritative, calling the banks, the investment firms, explaining the situation, citing laws and document numbers. I sat and listened, amazed by the complex world of finance I had always been told I was too naive to understand. Theron, and later Serena and Julian, had always spoken to me as if I were a child when it came to money. They simplified concepts, assuming I couldn't grasp them. Now I realized it wasn't protection. It was a strategy. By making me feel incompetent, they had stripped me of my power, turning me into a dependent. Next, Alaric called the police. A short while later, a detective walked into the office. She was young, perhaps Serena's age, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Detective Min An Tran, she introduced herself. Mr. Vance has briefed me on the situation. Mrs. Vance, I'm very sorry for what you've been through. There was something in the way she looked at me, a professional yet sincere empathy that made me feel seen. I recounted my story, from Serena's cruel words to the squalid room at the Sunset Inn. Detective Tran listened intently, taking careful notes. When I showed her the forged documents Serena had given me, she examined them under a lamp. "These forgeries are quite sophisticated," she commented. "This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone planned this carefully." "You think Serena had help?" I asked. "Almost certainly. Creating convincing legal forgeries requires specific knowledge and connections. We'll need to investigate whether Julian or someone in his financial network was involved." Her words planted a new seed of suspicion. Julian. He always seemed polite, but there was a slick, polished quality about him I'd never fully trusted. Was he just a supportive husband, or was he the architect behind this scheme? Within 2 hours, every account was frozen. Alaric received confirmation emails from the banks. A small but powerful sense of victory surged through me. Serena was probably in my house right now, browsing furniture websites, planning her new, luxurious life. I wondered how long it would take for her to notice. My phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. Serena's name flashed on the screen. My heart hammered once, but I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm and cold. This was the moment of truth. "Mom, where are you?" Her voice was edged with panic. "There's some kind of mix-up with the bank accounts. They're saying Daddy's assets are frozen." "Hello, Serena. I'm sitting in Alaric Vance's office. You remember him, don't you? Dad's attorney, the one who read the real will to an empty room while you were telling him I was traveling." Silence hung on the other end of the line, a heavy, guilty silence. Then she stammered, "Mom, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but—" "Oh, I've discovered that you're a liar and a thief, sweetheart," I interrupted, the fake sweetness in my voice as sharp as a razor. "I also discovered that your father was much smarter than either of us realized." "You don't understand," she said, trying to regain control. "I was protecting you from the complexity of managing all that money. You've never had to deal with investments." "No, I understand perfectly. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and threw your 67-year-old mother out of her own house because you thought I was too stupid to notice." Her voice turned sharp, desperate. "Mom, you're confused. The grief has been overwhelming, and someone is obviously taking advantage of your emotional state." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, Serena was trying to manipulate me. It was time to end the chess match. "Serena, dear, let me clarify something for you. Not only did you never inherit anything, but your actual inheritance, the $10 million your father left you, is now mine as well, thanks to a lovely little clause he included about treating me with dignity and respect." "That's impossible!" she shrieked. "Detective Min An Tran is sitting right here if you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with her," I said softly. The phone went quiet. I could almost hear Serena's mind racing, calculating, searching for an angle. "Mom, please, can we meet somewhere and talk about this reasonably? I'm sure we can work something out." "Oh, we'll definitely be meeting soon, at the courthouse, when you're arraigned." "You wouldn't dare press charges against your own daughter," she hissed, desperation turning to rage. Something cold and final crystallized in my chest. The last thread connecting me to the woman on the other end of the line snapped. "Watch me." I hung up and looked at Alaric, who was beaming with approval. Detective Tran gave me a respectful nod. "You handled that very well, Mrs. Vance. That recording will be invaluable evidence." "How long until she's arrested?" I asked, my voice still trembling with adrenaline. "Detective Tran has enough for a warrant." They'll pick her up this evening, Alaric replied. And Julian? His financial records are being subpoenaed, said Detective Tran. If he participated in creating those documents, he'll face charges too. My phone buzzed with a text from Serena. Mom, please don't do this. Think about the grandchildren. I showed the message to Detective Tran, who smiled grimly. Emotional manipulation, a classic behavioral pattern for this type of crime. I typed back. I am thinking about them. They deserve to see what happens when you steal from family. The feeling as I sent that message was strange. A part of me ached for the rupture, for the grandchildren who would be affected. But a larger, stronger part of me knew this was the right thing to do. Sometimes, to protect the future, you have to sever the toxic parts of the past. 20 minutes later, Julian called. His voice was strained, trying to sound calm. Elara, surely we can resolve this privately. Serena made some poor decisions, but involving the police seems excessive. Julian, did you help her forge those documents? I asked point blank. That's not... Elara, you have to understand the pressure Serena was under. She was worried about your mental state, your ability to handle large sums of money. So that's a yes. His silence was an admission. I continued, my voice like ice. Julian, here's what's going to happen. You're both going to be arrested. You're both going to face federal fraud charges, and I'm going to be sitting in my house, watching it all unfold. Elara, please be reasonable. I was reasonable for 43 years. It didn't work out well for me. After hanging up, I looked out Alaric's office window. The sky was turning the color of sunset. A day had ended, and a world had collapsed. Serena's world. But another world was just beginning. Mine. The police arrested Serena at 8:30 p.m. while she was having dinner at Le Bernardin, a world-class restaurant, apparently celebrating her inheritance with Julian and another couple. According to Detective Tran, she screamed about false arrest and demanded to call her lawyer. That night, Alaric arranged a suite for me at the Four Seasons, using a small fraction of my newly rescued estate. From a dingy room at the Sunset Inn to a luxury suite overlooking the city. The change was dizzying, but it was more than just luxury. It was a statement. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was just getting started. The first night after my world was upended for the second time, I slept in a bed larger than the entire motel room at the Sunset Inn. Egyptian cotton sheets, soft down pillows, and a sparkling view of the city outside my window. It was luxurious, but I didn't feel joy. I felt a strange emptiness, like a soldier returning from battle, still in their muddy armor, walking into a palace. I didn't belong here yet. The place I belonged, my fortress, had been occupied by the enemy. And the next morning, I knew I had to go back. News of Julian's arrest came via a call from Alaric in the morning. He'd been arrested at his office, in front of his colleagues and partners. The forensic accountant traced the forged documents to a printing company Julian's firm uses, Alaric explained, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. Apparently, your son-in-law had quite the criminal resume that Serena either didn't know about or chose to ignore. After the call, I stood before the large, marble-clad mirror in the bathroom. The woman looking back at me was tired. Her eyes were shadowed, but her gaze was different. The confusion and fear were gone. In their place was a sharp focus, a hardness I'd never seen in myself before. I had spent my life being a soft woman, a gentle wife, a forgiving mother. What had that softness gotten me? Contempt and a one-way ticket to a welfare home. No. That woman had died at the Sunset Inn. The woman in this mirror was someone else. I called for a car and asked the driver to take me to 847 Oakwood Drive. My heart hammered during the entire ride. I was afraid of what I would find, of what Serena had done to the house. But more than fear, there was a burning desire to step inside, to breathe its air, to declare that it was mine. As the car turned onto the familiar street, I saw the old oak tree Theron and I had planted when Serena was just 5. It was still standing, tall and patient, like a loyal guard. The key was still in my purse. When I slid it into the lock and turned, the door opened with a familiar click. I stepped inside and froze in the foyer. The house was eerily silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I knew. It was the silence of a violated space. Serena, in just a short time, had already begun her campaign to erase my existence. On the wall where generations of family photos had once hung, there was now a single, expensive, cold piece of abstract art. My beloved books on the shelves had been replaced with glossy fashion magazines. Worse, in the master bedroom, my bedroom, Theron's and my bedroom, she had moved her things in. The space was filled with the cloying scent of Serena's Chanel perfume, a fragrance that now made me nauseous. Her designer clothes were strewn over the armchair where Theron used to read. Expensive cosmetic cases cluttered my vanity. She had replaced Theron's careful organization and my quiet warmth with her own selfish chaos. It wasn't just moving in. It was a statement of ownership, an insult to 43 years of memory. Anger flared in me, hot and cleansing. I marched down to the basement, where I knew we kept rolls of large black trash bags. Then I returned to the bedroom. Systematically, without a shred of hesitation, I began to purge. The Prada dress? Into a bag? The Jimmy Choo shoes? Into a bag? The collection of perfumes? All into another bag. I didn't care about their value. To me, they were garbage, the tangible evidence of greed and betrayal. Every item I tossed into a bag was an act of liberation, a declaration that I was taking back my space, both physically and spiritually. I was evicting her from my life, starting with its most sacred place. When I dragged the heavy trash bags out to the front porch, I felt an immense sense of relief. Let her collect them when she makes bail, I thought to myself. That night, for the first time in 43 years, I slept alone in the master bedroom. After changing the sheets back to my old set and spritzing some lavender to chase away Serena's perfume, I lay down in the familiar bed. The space beside me was painfully empty. The grief for Theron washed over me, but it was different this time. It wasn't the pain of helpless loss, but a deep, quiet sorrow, a peaceful goodbye. This house was no longer Theron's sanctuary, and it certainly wasn't Serena's prize. For the first time, I looked around and realized it could be my own. I could repaint these walls, change the furniture, and make it a reflection of me, the woman I was becoming. Around noon the next day, Alaric called with updates. Serena's bail is set at $50,000. Since all her accounts are frozen, she'll have to find someone else to cover it. And Julian? $200,000. Apparently, the judge wasn't impressed with his history of financial crimes. Who knew your son-in-law was already under investigation for securities fraud? I certainly hadn't. But then again, I'd been excluded from most family financial discussions. Serena and Julian had always spoken to me like I was a child when money came up. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating my intelligence. Alaric, I want to make some changes to the house, I said, a sudden idea taking shape. Serena had contractors lined up for a renovation. I'd like to proceed with some of those plans, but with my own vision. Excellent idea, he replied. It's your home now, Ilara. Do whatever makes you happy. What made me happy, I realized, was the idea of undoing every assumption Serena had made about my future and this house. She had planned to gut the kitchen, replace the hardwood floors, and convert Theron's study into a wine cellar. I was going to turn his study into an art studio, and the wine cellar plans into a library. My phone rang, an unknown number. Mrs. Vance, this is Janet Cooper from Channel 7 News. We understand you're the victim of a significant elder fraud case involving your daughter. Would you be willing to share your story? Word was out. In a city this size, the arrest of a prominent investment banker and his wife for defrauding his elderly mother-in-law was a bombshell story. Ms. Cooper, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not ready to make any public statements, I said, feeling a jolt of panic. I understand this must be difficult, but your story could help other seniors recognize the warning signs of family financial abuse. She had a point. How many other women my age were being manipulated by adult children who saw them as inconvenient obstacles to an inheritance? If I decided to tell my story, would I have control over how it's presented? I asked. a new thought beginning to form. Absolutely. We could arrange a sit-down interview where you'd have approval over the final edit. I thought about Serena, probably sitting in a jail cell, still believing this was all a misunderstanding she could charm her way out of. Taking this story public would be the final, undeniable blow. Ms. Cooper, let me get back to you. I might have quite a story to tell. After hanging up, I went to the dining room and poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Julian had sent us for Christmas. Wine that, apparently, I was now drinking in my own house, purchased with my own money, while contemplating whether to publicly humiliate my daughter on television. Life had certainly taken an interesting turn. I took a sip of the wine. The rich, bitter taste spread across my tongue. It was the taste of victory, and it was sweet. The next morning, the house was filled with sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I woke up with a sense of peace. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, walked through my backyard, and even sketched out a few ideas for my future art studio. This space no longer smelled of Serena's perfume or the ghost of her betrayal. It was beginning to smell like hope, like a new beginning. I thought I could start rebuilding my life in the quiet. But the past has a habit of knocking on your door when you least expect it. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m., sharp and insistent. Through the small window in the door, I could see Serena on my front porch. She looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Yesterday's expensive clothes were wrinkled. Her usually perfect blonde hair was a mess, and her flawless makeup was smudged with tear tracks. She'd made bail somehow. The vulture in designer clothes now looked more like a broken-winged bird. A flicker of pity sparked in me, a maternal reflex, but I extinguished it instantly. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. I opened the door but blocked the threshold, making no move to invite her in. "Mom, please! We need to talk!" Serena pleaded, her voice hoarse. "We talked yesterday," I replied, my own voice colder and steadier than I'd expected. "You told me to find somewhere else to die. I found somewhere to live instead." Serena's eyes were red-rimmed. Her usual perfect composure was completely shattered. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'm still your daughter." "Are you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Because daughters don't typically forge legal documents to steal their mother's inheritances." "I wasn't stealing. I was—" She stopped, clearly struggling to find words that didn't sound criminal. "You were what, Serena? Go on. Let me hear the polished justification you rehearsed in your jail cell last night." "I was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions," she blurted out. "You've never managed large amounts of money." Even now, even after being arrested for fraud, publicly humiliated, she couldn't admit the truth. In Serena's twisted mind, she was still the victim, and I was the clueless old woman who needed protecting. That lie was her final fortress, and I knew I had to tear it down. "Serena, let me share something your father told me 6 months before he died," I said slowly, looking directly into her eyes so she couldn't escape. "He said he was worried about your sense of entitlement, your attitude toward money, and how you treated people you considered beneath you." Her face went pale. "Daddy never said that." "Oh, but he did. He said you reminded him of his sister, your Aunt Ellen. Beautiful, charming, and completely incapable of thinking about anyone but yourself." I could see each word hitting her like a shard of glass. "He told me he was changing the will specifically because he was afraid of what you'd do to me if you had control." "That's a lie!" Serena cried, but her voice trembled. I pulled out my phone. "Actually, it's not." I showed her a recording file on the screen. "Your father recorded a video message explaining his decision. It was to be played if you ever contested the will or if you treated me poorly after his death. You see, Serena, your father wasn't as naive as you thought." Serena stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Her entire body was shaking. "He knew," I continued, without a shred of mercy. "He knew exactly who you were underneath all that charm. The only thing he didn't predict was how far you'd actually go." "Play it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I touched the screen. Theron's voice filled the morning air, clear, measured, and utterly devastating. It was the voice Serena had always revered, the voice of the father she always assumed was on her side. "Serena, If you are hearing this recording, it means my fears about your character were justified. I had hoped I was wrong. I had hoped that my daughter had more integrity than I suspected. But if your mother is playing this for you, it means you have proven me right in the worst possible way. Serena sank onto the porch steps, her body caving in as if struck by an invisible whip. Theron's voice continued, steady and unwavering. I spent 43 years watching your mother sacrifice her dreams, her ambitions, and her independence to take care of our family. She worked part-time jobs to help pay for your college while I built my business. She postponed her own education, gave up career opportunities, and poured herself into being the wife and mother she thought we needed. The recording went on for 3 more minutes, each word carefully chosen. Each sentence was a scalpel, cutting through Serena's justifications and self-deceptions. I watched her flinch as Theron recounted how her mother had stayed up all night nursing her through pneumonia, how she had sold a family heirloom from her own grandmother so Serena could afford the European trip she desperately wanted. Memories she had conveniently forgotten. By the time you hear this, Theron's voice concluded, you will have discovered that treating your mother poorly has cost you everything. I hope it was worth it. When it ended, Serena was crying. Not the pretty tears she'd used to manipulate people since childhood. These were ugly, broken sobs. He hated me, she whispered through her gasps. No, Serena. He loved you enough to hope you'd prove him wrong. You chose to prove him right instead. She looked up at me, mascara streaking her cheeks. What happens now? Now, you face the consequences of your choices. The fraud charges, the investigation, the public humiliation when this story hits the news. The news? She looked even more horrified. Channel 7 wants to interview me about elder financial abuse. I'm thinking of saying yes. Serena's face completely crumpled. Mom, please. Think about what this will do to the grandchildren, to Julian's career, to our whole family. I am thinking about it, I said. I'm thinking about how you didn't consider any of those things when you decided to commit multiple felonies. She stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I had ever seen her. I know you won't believe this, but I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted the money. I wanted the security, the status. I wanted to never have to worry about anything again. For the first time since this nightmare began, Serena was telling the truth. I believe you, sweetheart. But wanting something doesn't justify destroying people to get it. She nodded, tears still flowing. What can I do to fix this? You can start by admitting what you did was wrong. Not misguided, not protective, not complicated. Wrong. Utterly and unforgivably wrong. I paused, letting my words sink in. And then, you can face whatever consequences come next with some dignity, instead of trying to manipulate your way out of them. Serena looked at me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not the pushover mother she'd always known, but the woman who had just completely outmaneuvered her. I deserved this, didn't I? I didn't answer with words. I just looked at her, a look not of triumph, but of grim, sad finality for the daughter I had lost. Then I slowly stepped back and closed the door. The click of the deadbolt felt like a period at the end of a long, painful chapter of my life. Outside, I could still hear Serena's sobbing, but it was in another world now. A world I had just left behind. If you think forcing your own daughter to face justice is the hardest part, you're mistaken. When you confront greed, you aren't just confronting an individual, you're confronting the entire ecosystem that feeds it. 3 days after the fiery confrontation on my porch, another uninvited guest appeared at my door. This time, it wasn't a broken-winged vulture. This time, it was the queen of the flock. Julian's mother, Eleanora Hayes, stood on my doorstep. She was everything I had imagined and more. Perfectly coiffed platinum hair, diamonds sparkling in the morning sun, and an radiating air of entitlement that can only come from 3 generations of inherited wealth. She smiled at me, a smile so practiced it didn't reach her ice-cold eyes. Elara, she said, my name sounding foreign on her tongue. We need to discuss this situation rationally. I invited her in, not out of politeness, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see what version of reality the Hayes family had constructed to explain their son's felony charges. Eleonora settled herself on my living room sofa as if she were granting me an audience. She scanned the room, and I could see a subtle judgment in her eyes, as if assessing the taste of a housekeeper. Julian made some poor choices, obviously, she began, placing a Hermès handbag that cost as much as a car on the small table beside her. But prosecuting him seems rather vindictive, don't you think? Vindictive? I repeated, unable to believe the audacity. Your son helped steal my inheritance and threw me out of my own house. I call that justice, not vindictiveness. Oh, please, she waved a dismissive hand. Julian was simply following Serena's lead. He didn't understand the full situation. The woman was actually trying to blame my daughter for her son's criminal behavior. I had to admire the gall. She was attempting to paint her son as a passive victim, a poor husband led astray by his greedy wife. Mrs. Hayes, I said, my voice calm but firm. Julian created forged legal documents. That is not following someone's lead. That is conspiracy to commit fraud. Your son was an active conspirator, not an innocent bystander. Eleonora smiled, clearly believing she'd found an opening. Julian's lawyer believes we can reach a settlement that benefits everyone. You get your house back. Serena faces appropriate consequences, and Julian avoids the publicity of a trial. Appropriate consequences? I asked, a cold anger rising in me. She spoke of Serena's crimes as if they were a minor breach of etiquette. What kind of settlement are you talking about? Julian's family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience, she said, her tone that of someone bestowing charity. Let's say $2 million in exchange for you dropping the charges against Julian. $2 million. To forgive the man who helped steal $33 million from me. To forgive the man who watched me be cast out of my home without a word. The insult of the offer almost made me laugh. Mrs. Hayes, your son participated in a scheme that cost me everything I owned. You think $2 million covers that? Alara, be realistic, she sighed, as if speaking to a stubborn child. Julian has a career, children, a reputation to maintain. Sending him to prison serves no one. It serves justice, I replied. Eleonora's polished facade cracked slightly. A flash of anger crossed her eyes. Justice? You're destroying multiple families over money that you would never have known how to manage anyway. And there it was. That same condescending attitude. The attitude that had poisoned my relationship with Serena for years. In their world, the world of people like Eleonora and Julian, I was just a simple housewife who'd lucked into a rich husband and was now sullying their tidy world with vulgar concepts like justice and dignity. In their eyes, the money was never really mine to begin with because I wasn't worthy of it. Mrs. Hayes, I think we're done here, I said, standing up. Alara, please reconsider. $5 million. Final offer. $5 million for Julian to walk free. The amount was staggering, but the principle was non-negotiable. My answer is no. Eleonora stood, her composure completely restored. She slipped her invisible cloak of authority back on. Very well. But you should know that Kevin's legal team has found some interesting information about your husband's business practices. The threat was clear, wrapped in silk, but I felt no fear, only a cold curiosity. What kind of information? The kind that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this situation was. With that, she turned and walked out of my house, leaving a heavy silence and the scent of expensive perfume in the air. As soon as she was gone, I called Alaric. I recounted the entire conversation, including the offer and the final threat. Alara, whatever they think they've found, it doesn't change the facts of Serena and Julian's crimes, Alaric assured me. But could it affect the case? Potentially. If they can muddy the waters enough, create doubt about Theron's character or business practices, it might influence a jury. The classic muddy the waters tactic. I thought about Theron, about our marriage, about all the secrets that might be buried in 43 years of a shared life. Theron was a good man, I believed that. But he was also a sharp and private businessman. Was there something I didn't know? A dark corner in the empire he had built? Alaric, I said, a decision forming in my mind. I want to know everything about Theron's business. Every deal, every partnership, every potential irregularity. Alara, are you sure? Alaric's voice was hesitant. Sometimes the past is better left alone. The Hayes family is threatening to drag Theron's memory through the mud to protect their criminal son, I replied, my voice hard. I'd rather know the truth first. That evening, I sat in Theron's study, my study now, and began going through his files systematically. Theron had been meticulously organized, every document dated and categorized. But as I dug deeper into his business records, I began finding things that didn't quite make sense. Payments to shell companies, consulting fees that seemed excessive, partnerships with firms that appeared to exist only on paper. The more I read, the more a growing sense of unease settled over me. Eleanor's threat wasn't a bluff. She knew something. By midnight, surrounded by stacks of papers and ledgers, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about the man I had been married to for 43 years. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Theron's study, surrounded by the evidence of a life I never knew existed. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, the father of my child, was a stranger. Every file, every ledger, every questionable invoice was a knife in my memory, turning 43 years of marriage into an elaborate lie. The feeling was worse than Serena's betrayal. Serena had stabbed me from the front. Theron, it seemed, had been slowly poisoning me for 4 decades. The next morning, I called Alaric, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I need an expert, I said. The best you can find. Someone who can look at these numbers and tell me exactly what I'm dealing with. The private investigator Alaric recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Carol Tran, who specialized in financial crimes. She had perceptive eyes that missed nothing and a calm, professional demeanor that I found strangely reassuring. She spent 6 hours in Theron's study, photographing documents and building what she called the real picture of your husband's business empire. When she sat down across from me at the coffee table in my living room, her face was unreadable, but I knew the news wasn't going to be good. Mrs. Vance, she began, gently but directly. Your husband was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his consulting firm. We're talking about millions of dollars in illegal transactions over the past decade. The revelation hit me like a gut punch, sucking the air from my lungs. That's impossible. Theron was the most honest man I knew. I shook my head, a futile attempt to deny the truth laid out before me. I'm sorry, but the evidence is overwhelming. Carol pointed to a chart she'd drawn, connecting shell companies to payments and timelines. He was washing money for organized crime families, using his legitimate business as a front. I stared at the documents spread across the table. Invoices for services never rendered, consulting contracts with companies that didn't exist, payment schedules that corresponded with known criminal activities, all of Theron's sudden business trips, the whispered late-night phone calls he dismissed as sensitive work matters, his patronizing attitude whenever I asked about finances. All the disparate pieces now clicked into place, forming a grotesque picture. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice faint. Based on these records, at least 12 years? Probably longer. 12 years. While I was planning dinner parties and attending charity galas, my husband was facilitating criminal enterprises. The life I thought I had, this house, the vacations, my grandchildren's tuition, it was all built on a dirty foundation. Mrs. Vance, there's more, Carol continued, her voice hesitant. The $10 million Theron left for Serena. That money came directly from the laundered funds. If the FBI discovers this, they'll seize everything as proceeds of criminal activity. The room started to spin. Everything? The house, the investments? All of it? Unless what? I pleaded. Carol looked uncomfortable. Unless Serena and Julian's legal team already knows about this and is planning to use it as leverage. If they tip off the FBI about your husband's crimes, they might be able to negotiate immunity in exchange for their cooperation. My daughter and her husband weren't just thieves. They were holding a nuclear weapon to my head. They would burn the whole house down just to get the keys to the front door. "What are my options?" I asked, a cold despair washing over me. "Legally," Carol explained, "you could contact the FBI yourself, come forward voluntarily, and hope for leniency. You'd lose most of the money, but you might keep the house, and you'd keep your integrity." "And if I don't?" "Serena and Julian's lawyers will probably leak this information strategically. You'll lose everything anyway, but you'll also face potential charges for unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity." I thought of Eleanora Hayes's smug confidence, her certainty that I'd accept their settlement offer. They'd known about Theron's crimes all along. They had been waiting, holding this trump card until they needed it most. "Carol, how did they find this out?" "Julian's an investment banker. He would have recognized the patterns in your husband's financial records. The question is, what are they planning to do with this information?" My phone rang. Serena's number. My heart stopped. I looked at Carol, who nodded for me to answer. "Mom?" Serena's voice came through. It wasn't the pleading, sobbing voice from a few days ago. It was cold, crisp, and businesslike. "We need to meet tonight. There are things you need to know about Dad that change everything." "I already know, Serena." Silence on the other end. Then, a note of surprise in her voice. "You know what?" "I know about the money laundering. I know about the criminal connections. I know that everything your father left us is tainted." "Mom, listen to me carefully," Serena said, her voice now holding a terrifying confidence. "Julian's lawyers have been in contact with the FBI. They're willing to let us renegotiate our situation." "What kind of renegotiation?" "Julian gets immunity in exchange for providing information about Dad's criminal network. You get to keep $5 million and the house. The rest goes to the government." "And you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The fraud charges disappear. We all walk away from this mess." It was brilliant, in a sociopathic way. Serena had turned my moral victory into her strategic advantage. She had turned her own father's betrayal into her get-out-of-jail-free card. "Serena, you're asking me to help you profit from your crimes by exploiting Dad's crimes." "I'm asking you to be practical," she retorted. "The alternative is losing everything and potentially facing charges yourself." I looked around Theron's study, seeing it clearly for the first time. The expensive furniture, the rare books, the art collection, all of it purchased with blood money. "I need time to think." "Mom, the FBI meeting is tomorrow morning. Julian's lawyer needs an answer tonight." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of Theron's study, surrounded by the evidence of his double life. 43 years of marriage to a stranger. A daughter who hadn't just inherited money from her father. She had inherited his talent for deception. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated who I was when my back was against the wall. She thought I would choose the easy path, the path of compromise, of fear. She didn't understand that the woman who had packed her life into 2 suitcases no longer existed. I picked up the phone and dialed Carol Tran. "Carol, how quickly can you get me a meeting with the FBI? I have a story to tell them, and I think they're going to find it very, very interesting." There is a moment in every chess game when you realize you can't win by playing by your opponent's rules. You have to overturn the whole board. Sitting in Theron's study, surrounded by his lies and facing my daughter's blackmail, I had that moment. Serena and Julian thought they were holding a nuclear weapon. They didn't know I was willing to press the button myself. The meeting with the FBI took place in Alaric's conference room. Across from me sat Special Agent Sarah Luong, a serious, intelligent woman who was completely immune to charm or games. She sat there, recording our conversation and taking notes with an almost mechanical precision. Alaric sat beside me, his steady presence a silent source of comfort. I laid out everything, clearly and methodically. Theron's criminal legacy, Serena's fraud scheme, Julian's forgeries, and finally, the blatant extortion attempt, masquerading as a settlement offer. I didn't embellish. I didn't cry. I simply presented the facts as cold as a report. When I finished, Agent Luong studied me for a long moment. Mrs. Vance, you understand that by coming forward voluntarily, you are potentially admitting to benefiting from the proceeds of criminal activity, correct? I understand, I replied, but I would rather tell you the truth than let my daughter and her husband manipulate this situation for their own benefit. Agent Luong smiled for the first time, a barely perceptible flicker. Are you afraid, Mrs. Vance? I considered the question. Agent, 2 weeks ago, I was a grieving widow sleeping in a budget motel. Today, I'm sitting here, voluntarily confessing to federal agents about my dead husband's criminal enterprise. Fear is no longer my primary emotion. What is? Anger, I said, feeling it like a cold steel core in my chest. Pure, crystallized anger at being manipulated by people who underestimated my intelligence for decades. Agent Luong's smile widened slightly. Mrs. Vance, would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, I was sitting in my own living room with a small recording device taped to my chest under my sweater. The cool feel of it against my skin was a constant reminder of the dangerous hand I was playing. 2 other FBI agents were in Theron's study, monitoring via tiny hidden cameras. I was turning my home into a stage, and the final act was about to begin. They knocked at exactly 8 p.m. Serena and Julian, both dressed as if attending an important business dinner. Julian carried a leather briefcase, probably containing immunity agreements and settlement papers. They walked in with the confidence of winners. Mom, you look better than you have in weeks, Serena said, kissing my cheek as if nothing had happened. The kiss was as cold as ice. I feel better. Clarity has that effect, I replied, inviting them to sit. Julian opened his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who had conducted similar negotiations before. Alara, our lawyers have structured this very favorably for you. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, and complete immunity from any charges related to Theron's activities. Clean assets. That's an interesting phrase, I said, my tone neutral. Serena shot Julian a warning look. Mom, the important thing is that we're all protected. The past stays buried, and we all move forward. What about the $33 million Theron actually left me? I asked, playing the part of a greedy old woman. Mom, Serena sighed, her patience feigned. That money is tainted. It can't be separated from Dad's criminal activities. Taking $5 million is the best possible outcome. And you two? I asked. What do you get out of this arrangement? Julian leaned forward, his confidence returning. We get to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Serena's charges disappear. My reputation remains intact, and our family can heal. Misunderstanding. He was still calling felony fraud a misunderstanding. I decided it was time to spring the trap. Julian, help me understand something. When exactly did you discover Theron's criminal activities? What do you mean? I mean, did you know about the money laundering when you married Serena? Or did you only discover it recently while you were planning to steal my inheritance? They exchanged glances. Alara, I don't think that's relevant to our current discussion, Julian said, trying to steer the conversation. Actually, I think it's very relevant. Because if you knew about Theron's crimes and said nothing, that makes you an accessory after the fact. And if you only discovered them while committing your own crimes, that makes you remarkably unlucky. I looked them both in the eye. Let me be clear. For me to agree to this, I need to be sure it won't fall apart. So, if I don't sign this, your lawyers go to the FBI with Theron's files, correct? That's the plan? Their silence was the answer. I had it, clear as day on the recording. Serena's composure was beginning to crack. Mom, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you two have been planning this for months, possibly years. The forged will, the discovery of the money laundering, even Julian's connections to document forgers. None of this was spontaneous. "That's ridiculous," Serena said, but her voice trembled. "Is it?" Agent Luong finds it quite plausible. The color drained from both of their faces. "Agent Luong?" Julian whispered the name like a curse. "FBI," I clarified. "She's been very interested in my story about systematic elder abuse, fraud, and extortion, particularly the part where you tried to blackmail me with my dead husband's crimes." Julian stood up abruptly, reaching for his briefcase. "Ilara, this conversation is over." "Actually, Julian, I think it's just beginning." On cue, Agent Luong and two other federal agents entered my living room from the study. Serena and Julian sat frozen in place. The briefcase Julian had been reaching for was confiscated immediately, along with both their phones. "Serena Vance Hayes and Julian Hayes," Agent Luong announced, her voice echoing in the dead silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness." Serena turned to me, her face a mask of absolute betrayal. Tears streamed from her horrified eyes. "Mom, how could you do this to your own family?" "The same way you could forge legal documents and steal my inheritance, sweetheart," I replied, my voice betraying no emotion. "Except my way is legal." As the agents handcuffed them, Julian tried one last desperate play. "Ilara, you don't understand what you've done. There are people connected to Theron's business who won't appreciate federal attention. You've put yourself in danger." Agent Luong paused while reading them their rights. "Mr. Hayes, are you threatening a federal witness? I'm warning her about the reality of her situation." "The reality," Agent Luong said, "is that you just added witness intimidation to your list of charges." After they were removed, the room fell silent. Agent Luong sat back down across from me. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her expression serious, "Julian's warning might not be entirely empty. Your husband was connected to some dangerous people." "How dangerous?" "The Torino crime family, primarily. They've been using legitimate businesses to launder money for decades. Your husband's consulting firm was one of their most successful operations." The name meant nothing to me, but the agent's expression told me everything I needed to know. "Are you saying I'm in actual physical danger?" "Potentially. But there's something else you should know about your husband's operation. Something that changes everything." Agent Luong pulled out a thick file folder, the kind that suggested months of investigation. "Mrs. Vance, your husband wasn't just laundering money for the Torino family. He was an FBI informant. If my life were a novel, that moment was the last page of a chapter where the author reveals that everything you thought you knew was wrong. Your husband was an FBI informant." Those 5 words hung in the silent air of my living room, more powerful than any accusation, more shocking than any betrayal. My world didn't just tilt. It shattered and reassembled itself into a completely new picture right before my eyes. I stared at Agent Luong, searching for any sign of confusion or deceit, but all I saw was the unvarnished truth. "He was an informant?" I stammered. "For 12 years, Agent Luong confirmed. He was providing information on the Torino family's operations while appearing to facilitate their money laundering. It was a deep, long-term, and extremely dangerous undercover operation. It was so sensitive that even local FBI offices weren't informed." I sank back into my chair, my mind reeling. I was trying to reconcile 2 impossible images of Theron: the quiet, dependable husband I knew, and a double agent living in the lion's den. All the secrets, the sudden trips, the distance. I had interpreted them as signs of betrayal, of a criminal life. But I was wrong, utterly wrong. It wasn't the distance of a sinner. It was the loneliness of a soldier. The nights he tossed and turned weren't from guilt, but from the pressure, from the fear of living a double life. His admonitions to not worry about my business weren't patronizing. They were a desperate attempt to protect me, to keep me and Serena outside the firewall he walked through every single day. "But the money was real," I said, trying to cling to a piece of logic. The FBI allowed him to keep a percentage of the laundered funds as payment for his cooperation and to maintain his cover, Agent Luong explained. Everything he left you was earned through legitimate federal cooperation. And then, the final truth hit me. So, the $33 million, it's legally mine. Entirely yours, she confirmed. Your husband passed away before the investigation concluded, but his cooperation over 12 years directly led to 47 arrests and the seizure of over $200 million in criminal assets. His legacy isn't just money, Mrs. Vance. He helped us dismantle one of the largest crime syndicates on the East Coast. Why didn't anyone tell me? Tears began to well up, but this time they weren't tears of anger or sorrow. They were tears of understanding, of mourning for a burden my husband had to carry all by himself. Because the investigation was ongoing, and because we weren't certain of your involvement or knowledge, we had to protect the integrity of the operation. Ironically, your daughter and son-in-law's fraud scheme actually helped us confirm your innocence. The irony was perfect, almost poetic. In her blind greed, Serena had tried to blackmail me with the very information that would, in fact, exonerate her father and legitimize my entire inheritance. She had brandished a sword she thought would kill me, but its blade severed her own last thread of hope. She had single-handedly handed me the final victory. Serena and Julian knew none of this, I said, more a statement than a question. They suspected criminal activity, but they had no idea about the federal cooperation. They were planning to blackmail you with information that would have actually cleared your husband's name. Agent Luong shook her head. Greed makes people stupid. After the agents left, the house fell quiet. The chaos of the arrests was over, leaving me alone with this earth-shattering truth. I walked into Theron's study. This time, I didn't see it as a crime scene, a monument to lies. I saw it with a new reverence. I touched his leather chair, ran my hand over the law books he loved. This man, my husband, had lived a life I couldn't possibly have imagined. He wasn't a fraud. He was a hero, one who had sacrificed his own peace of mind, and perhaps a piece of his soul, for a cause greater than himself. The grief of his loss returned, but now it was mingled with pride and a profound sadness that I could never tell him that I knew, that I understood. Agent Luong had left her card. Before she left, I had asked her one last question, a question that had been circling in my mind. Agent, in your professional opinion, am I a terrible person for feeling satisfaction about Serena's arrest? Agent Luong had looked at me, and this time, her smile was genuine and warm. Mrs. Vance, in my professional opinion, you're a woman who refused to be victimized. That's not terrible. That's inspiring. Her words echoed in my head. Inspiring. I had never thought of myself that way. I was just a wife, a mother, a widow. But maybe, in the process of fighting for what was mine, I had accidentally found someone new. The next morning, the news exploded. Massive FBI operation dismantles Torino crime family. Search warrants were executed across 3 states. Dozens of arrests were made. The criminal network Theron had helped expose was crumbling. The threat Julian had made had evaporated. The Torino family would be far too busy with their own legal troubles to worry about a widow on Oakwood Drive. I looked around my living room, which only last night had been the stage for a sting operation, and now was a space of peace. This house, this money, this life, it was all mine, legally, morally, and indisputably. The burden of a dirty legacy was lifted, replaced by the legacy of a silent hero. And I, Ilara Vance, was no longer the heir to a lie. I was the guardian of a truth. And now the question was no longer, what must I do to survive? But what will I do with this new life? They say time heals all wounds. I don't think that's entirely true. Time doesn't heal. Time gives you the space to heal yourself. It gives you the chance to build something new, something stronger, on the foundations of what was broken. 6 months after that fateful night, I was standing in a kitchen I had designed myself, making coffee for two. The morning sun streamed through the new windows I had chosen, illuminating the quartz countertops I loved. The house no longer held the heavy feeling of the past. It was filled with light, air, and laughter. "Good morning, Alara." Dr. Sarah Tran, Carol's sister and my new financial advisor, appeared in the doorway carrying a thick folder of reports. She was a brilliant, sharp woman with a warm smile, one of the key allies in my new team. "Good morning, Sarah. Ready for our quarterly review?" The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and personal transformation. Serena and Julian, after pleading guilty to avoid a lengthy public trial, were each serving 18-month federal sentences. Their story of greed and consequence had become a cautionary tale. And my story, unexpectedly, had made me a prominent voice in the world of senior advocacy. "Your portfolio is performing excellently," Sarah said, settling at my new breakfast table. "The charitable foundation is fully operational, and the scholarship fund has already selected its first recipients." The Alara Vance Foundation for Elder Protection had become my primary focus. Using $15 million of my inheritance, we were funding legal aid for seniors facing family financial abuse and supporting legislative changes to strengthen elder protection laws. My personal trauma had become a public mission. "Any word on the documentary?" I asked. "Netflix confirmed the production deal. They want to start filming next month." My story had captured media attention far beyond the initial news coverage. The Mother's Revenge. An American crime story was being developed as a limited series, with all proceeds going to elder advocacy organizations. "And Serena," Sarah's expression grew more careful, "she's written again. Her lawyer says she wants to apologize and ask for forgiveness." Serena had written me 17 letters from federal prison. I'd read the first few, which ranged from self-justifying to desperate, before deciding to stop opening them. "Sarah, has my stance on that changed?" I asked in return. "No, according to our previous conversations. But people can change, Alara. Even people who've made terrible choices." I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago. Grieving, dependent, willing to accept whatever scraps of dignity my family offered me. That woman might have felt obligated to forgive Serena, to rebuild a relationship based on guilt and tradition. But that woman was gone. "Sarah, please schedule a meeting with Serena's lawyer," I said. Sarah looked up, a little surprised. "Not to reconcile," I continued, "but to make something clear." "What's that?" "I want Serena to understand that her actions had consequences beyond legal punishment. I want her to know that she destroyed our relationship permanently, and that her children will grow up knowing why their mother went to prison." "That seems harsh," Sarah noted. "Good. It's supposed to be harsh. Serena made adult choices that hurt people she was supposed to love. She doesn't get to escape the emotional consequences just because she's written some prison letters." Sarah made a note in her leather portfolio. "And the grandchildren. She's requested supervised visits with them. My relationship with my grandchildren will be based on their choices when they are adults, not on their mother's rehabilitation efforts." The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck with a large package. "That must be the new furniture for the studio," I told Sarah. The art studio had been my favorite renovation project. Theron's former den was now a bright, airy space where I was rediscovering my love of painting, something I'd abandoned when I got married and assumed the role of the supportive wife and mother. "Alara, can I ask you something personal?" Sarah asked as I signed for the delivery. "Of course. Do you ever regret how this all played out? The prison sentences, the media attention, the permanent family estrangement?" I considered the question. 6 months ago, I had been invisible, a widow with no money, no home, and no prospects. Today, I was a millionaire philanthropist with a foundation in my name, a documentary deal, and a purpose that extended far beyond my own survival. "Sarah," I began, My daughter tried to steal everything I owned and leave me homeless. My son-in-law created forged documents and threatened me with blackmail. They showed me exactly who they were when they thought I was powerless to stop them. I don't regret holding them accountable. But they're still family, Sarah said softly. No, I said, my voice firm. They're DNA. Family are the people who protect you when you're vulnerable, not the people who exploit your vulnerability for profit. Family is a choice, an action, a loyalty. They failed that test. Sarah closed her portfolio, satisfied with my response. Besides, I added with a small smile, look what I became when I stopped allowing them to define my worth. After Sarah left, I walked through my house. Truly my house now, decorated according to my taste, organized around my priorities. In the art studio, I uncovered my latest painting. It was a self-portrait. A woman standing in bright sunlight, her face turned toward the future. The woman in the painting looked nothing like the grieving widow who'd packed her life into 2 suitcases 6 months ago. This woman looked powerful, independent, and unafraid. She looked like someone who had learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. Tomorrow, I would continue building the life I had chosen, rather than the life others had planned for me. And if Serena wanted to rebuild a relationship with this woman, she'd better bring a lot more than prison letters and hollow apologies. She'd better bring a complete transformation, one that could match my own. If someone had told me a year ago that the woman I am today would exist, I would have thought they were mad. That woman, the widow weeping in a cheap motel, the mother told by her own child to find somewhere else to die. She seems like a different person now from another lifetime. Today, I stood before my finished self-portrait, and I finally recognized her. The woman in the painting. The painting hangs in the place of honor in my new art studio. The woman in it is not smiling, but she is not sad. Her eyes, my eyes, look straight ahead, unflinching. They hold the pain of the past, the sharpness of battles fought. But above all, they are clear. They are the eyes of someone who has learned to see through lies, including the ones she told herself for decades. The background is not a dark old house or a dim motel room. It is brilliant light, the light of a new dawn. Last week, I visited Theron's grave. It was a quiet autumn afternoon with golden leaves rustling in the breeze. For the first time, I went not as a grieving widow, but as a partner coming to share a secret. I placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the headstone. I know now, I whispered. I know everything. Thank you, Theron. Thank you for being the hero I never knew. And thank you for believing in my strength, even when I didn't believe in it myself. There was no resentment left, only a deep love and understanding for the complex, brave man who had lived and died in silence. I had made peace with my past. The work at the foundation has given me a purpose far greater than personal revenge or even personal justice. The other day, I met one of the first people we helped, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Bach. His son was trying to pressure him into selling his family home to fund an investment. Looking into his tired but grateful eyes when our lawyer announced he had won his case, I saw myself. By helping him keep his home, I felt as though I was reaching back in time and saving the desperate Ilara of 6 months ago. That's when I understood. The best way to heal your own wounds is to help bandage someone else's. I no longer think much about Serena. Occasionally, her image flickers in my mind, not with anger, but with a distant sorrow. A sorrow for a bond that is permanently, irrevocably broken. She chose her path, and now she must walk it. I hope, someday, she finds redemption, not by begging for my forgiveness, but by truly changing who she is from the inside out. But that is her journey, no longer mine. And so my story comes to a close. A story that began with 2 suitcases and a cruel remark, and ends with a legacy of truth and an open future. I started this journey as a pawn on someone else's chessboard, a piece deemed useless. But I learned something important. Even the weakest pawn, if it walks far enough and refuses to give up, can become the queen. If you are watching this and you feel invisible, underestimated, or told that you are useless in your own life, please listen to me. Your worth is not determined by your role in someone else's life. It is not defined by being someone's wife, someone's mother, or someone's child. Your worth is inherent to who you are, in your resilience, your compassion, and your ability to get back up after you have been knocked down. Never let anyone tell you it's too late to start over. Never let anyone take away your power to write your own story. Seek your truth. Fight for your justice. And most importantly, fight for yourself. Those 43 years of my old life weren't a waste. They were a preparation. They taught me patience. They taught me to observe. And they showed me the price of silence. And now, I will not be silent anymore. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and please share your own story via emails or in the comments below. Your voice matters. Let it be heard.